Good evening, everyone. My name is Ron Bersati, and I'm the president of Recall System Pro. I want to start off by thanking the Dental Tribune for hosting this webinar this evening. We know the Dental Tribune is committed to supporting dentists and dental practices with making clinical and management education available to them. And I also want to thank everyone for taking time out of your busy schedules to participate this evening. I am delighted to be able to talk to you about patient recall and the difference that patient recall and recall system management can make to the growth and success of your practices. And I thought I would get started with the webinar by providing you with a little bit of information related to my background and what our goals for the webinar are. I am a dental practice management consultant by background, and prior to founding Recall System Pro, I spent 20 years providing practice management services to a wide range of dental practices. And over this period, we spent a lot of time focused on service and systems and assisting dental practices to maximize their productivity. And one of the primary focus areas for us has been patient recall and recall system management, which eventually led to the development of a patient recall software solution. As far as our goals for the webinar this evening, the first thing that I'd like to do is to share with you what we've learned related to the impact that patient recall can have on practice productivity and success. One of my goals is to help everyone participating understand the difference that patient recall can make and what it is you can do to take advantage of that information. From there, I'd like to provide you with some insight into the difficulties and challenges that dental practices tend to experience in attempting to get patient recall working for their practices, and some simple steps practices can take to effectively deal with these problem areas and maximize the benefits of recall. And then I'll finish the webinar this evening with an industry update. I'll provide you with a brief overview of the solutions that are available in the area of patient recall. And I'd like to introduce you to Recall System Pro, which is the software solution that we have developed to assist dental practices in the area of recall. I'm very excited to be with you online this evening. And again, if there's any questions that you do have as the webinar is progressing, you can enter them on the screen, and I'll be happy to address those at the end of the presentation. As far as the importance of patient recall is concerned, I don't think that there's any question that we all intuitively understand the importance of recall to practice productivity and success. The question that really needs to be answered is, just how important is recall? Where does recall fit into the overall scheme of things if you're looking to leverage the performance and productivity of a dental practice? And we thought the best way to help answer that question would be to explore some of the statistics that we have accumulated in our consulting practice that really define, just how important recall is. So we thought the best way of exploring this information would be to ask a few fill-in-the-blank questions, give you a chance to answer those questions wherever you may be, and then we'll compare your responses to the answers. So as a starting point, the first fill-in-the-blank question we have is, what percentage of overall revenues do you think stem from hygiene and recall? So I'm talking about hygiene department revenues and also restorative and dentist revenues that are generated from recall patients and recall exams. So I'll just give you a second to answer that question in your minds before I share the answer. And the answer is 75%. So 75% of overall practice revenues stem from your hygiene department and restorative revenues that are generated from recall patients, both of which are driven by how well your recall system is working. And this is based on data that we have collected in our consulting practice that also coincides with data provided by our data partner in the United States that specializes in dental practice monitoring. And this is the average percentage of revenues that are generated by hygiene and recall. The second question we have, or the next question we have, is what percentage of overall dentist and restorative revenues do you think stem from recall and recall exams versus restorative revenues, for example, from new patient exams? So I'll take a second to answer that, and then I'll share the answer with you. And the answer is 65% of dentist revenues stem from recall and recall exams versus new patients and new patient exams. And for practices that do not generate a lot of new patients, it can be significantly higher than that, up to 75 to 80% of revenues being generated from the recall exams. So what you see here is 75% of practice revenues and 65% of dentist revenues stem from hygiene and how well your recall system is working. And all of these results generate from one system. And what we came to understand in our consulting practice, just from these two indicators alone, is that patient recall offers a great deal of leverage as far as practice productivity is concerned, and it doesn't stop there. The next question that we have is what percentage of revenue increase is actually available from improved recall? So the background to this question is essentially practices work on recall as best as they can, and generally there's a lot of room for improvement in the area of recall for most dental practices, and including high functioning practices. So the question is, percentage-wise, how much more revenue do you think a typical dental practice could generate from improving their recalls? And the answer to that question is basically a 10 to 15% increase is readily available to dental practices that focus on recall system enhancement. And again, this applies to high functioning practices, and even more is available to practices that struggle with recall. And the final question that I have is more of a math question. And essentially, it is really, the reason that we ask the question, it's really easy to underestimate what the significance of a 10 to 15% increase in revenues actually means in terms of the bottom line returns to a practice or to a dentist's income. And so the question is, what do you think a 15% increase in revenues actually means in bottom line returns to practice income or to a dentist income? And the answer to that question is a 15% increase in practice revenues, which is achievable by most practices without having to increase their staff or fixed expenses, on average results in a 35% increase in dentist income. So that's a very big number that can make a significant difference to the financial viability of a dental practice. And as a final note, for dentists that are coming up to selling or transitioning their practices, it's important to keep in mind that any increases in practice revenues or dentist income through hygiene directly translates into associated increase in practice sale value, and a strong recall system and hygiene department gives purchasers a great deal of confidence in proceeding with sales. So what you're seeing here on the screen is how hygiene and recall impact dental practices in areas that are vital to their financial viability and success. All of the following flow from hygiene and recall and how well your recall system is working. And one of the things that I'd like to point out is that this information did not come to us right away in our consulting practice. It took us a while to accumulate this information. It took us a while to understand this information. We knew recall was important, and it was one of the first areas that we got to work on with our clients. But the truth is, we never fully realized how important recall was until we saw the results that were occurring with our clients over time. It was certainly one of those things that you know, but you really don't know until you experience it. And since then, an important goal for us has been to assist dentists and their teams to understand this information so that they can take advantage of it as well. There are many areas that you can focus on in your practice to enhance performance and productivity. And from our perspective, recall really is an area that needs to be a top priority for practices given the impact and the leverage that it has to offer. One of the things that we have done to actually help dentists and their teams understand their revenue opportunities that are available to them from focusing on recall is that we have developed a diagnostic tool that comes along with our software that analyzes the charts of a practice and identifies specific opportunities to increase both hygiene and restorative revenues. This report is the automation of a chart audit process that we used to manually conduct. And manual chart audits were very time-consuming, very expensive, but also very necessary if you're wanting to have an understanding of whether a dental practice was maximizing their productivity. And we're now able to auto-extract this information and all the data that is needed from practice management software systems and produce a report that is very, very accurate. And essentially what the report does is it reveals the untapped revenue potential that is sitting in practices. Essentially how this report works, and I'll just go through some of the outlines of the reports with you here in a second. It analyzes the hygiene and recall appointment frequencies of your patients, and then it benchmarks that information against practices that have well-functioning recall systems. And from there, it's able to identify specific opportunities to increase both your hygiene and restorative revenues from focusing on recall system enhancement. So you can see the report on the screen here. This is basically what it looks like. And the first thing that the report does is identifies the number of active patients that are in your practice. And as part of that, it washes out all of your emergency patients or patients that do not have any type of hygiene or recall appointment or visit to your practice. And so it gives you a pretty clear idea of your active patients. From there, the report then analyzes how often your patients are actually coming in on an annual basis for their hygiene and recall. 3 to 4 months, 6 months, 9 months, or 12 months or more, and then what the corresponding number of annual appointments are. The report then compares these results to practices that have well-functioning systems and determines what kind of an increase in annual appointments could be expected by focusing on recall system enhancement. And in this case, we are looking at a group practice, and we're seeing the potential increase of about 1,000 appointments. From there, we can determine what kind of increase in hygiene revenues could be expected by simply multiplying the increase in annual appointments by an average hygiene production per appointment. And in this case, we're using $195 per appointment. And we can also input a practice's actual hygiene production per appointment. And from there, we can determine the increase in achievable annual hygiene revenues. In this particular case, as I had mentioned to you, 15 to 20% is readily achievable. What we're seeing here is the increase that's available to a group practice that has been struggling with their recall in terms of not having the resources of their systems in place. And this is not uncommon in terms of what's available to practices. As far as the potential increase in restorative production is concerned, in this segment of the report, we know that about 60% of all hygiene appointments result in recall examinations. And in this particular case, increase in 1,000 appointments would result in an increase of approximately 604 recall exams on an annual basis. Again, we can calculate the increase in a practice can expect in restorative revenues by multiplying the increase in annual recall exams by an average restorative production per recall exam. In this case, we've used $350 as an average production per exam, which again can vary among dental practices depending on fee schedules and the type of dentistry that they're providing. And again, we can input a practice's actual restorative production per recall exam to determine that. So between both reports, we're able to quickly determine the increase in hygiene and restorative revenues available by focusing on recall system enhancement. And what this report does is essentially it enables practices to determine in advance what kind of revenue opportunities are available to them, so essentially that they're not shooting in the dark. So it gives practices something concrete that they can measure, use to measure their progress. and takes a great deal of the guesswork out of the situation. As far as what practices can expect, we have run this report on hundreds of practices, and our experience in working with practices has been that a 10 to 15% growth is readily achievable for most practices within the first 12 to 18 months of focusing on recall system enhancement. And the other factor that needs to be taken into consideration as well is that the effects of recall system management over time. As patients start to return to practices more regularly, not only does hygiene and restorative production increase, but also patient retention increases. And this starts to have a reinforcing flywheel effect over time. And it's not uncommon to see practices that have been able to achieve an effective recall system and sustain the recall system over time to achieve these types of growth levels. So our experience has been that in the practices that we have worked with, that this level of growth is certainly achievable. And you know, in addition to the beneficial impact that patient recall has on the dental health of patients, which we don't want to lose certainly sight of, there's no question that recall is a critically important system to practice success both in the short term and the long term. On the other hand, one of the patient recall is also one of the most difficult and challenging of systems for dental practices to get working. And dental practices tend to struggle with a number of common problems when it comes to recall. One of the most challenging problems that we see is practices continuing to struggle to fill openings and cancellations on a day-to-day basis. This is a significant source of stress for office staff in virtually every dental practice that we have worked with. Another common problem has got to do with patients falling out of schedules and getting lost in practice management software systems and then eventually leaving practices. And finally, patient recall is a system that is notoriously subject to slippage that can really affect the performance and productivity of a practice as well as the stress levels for staff. We have spent a lot of time working in offices and seeing firsthand the factors that make recall a difficult system for teams to deal with. And from our experience, we've identified three factors that get to the heart of what makes recall such a difficult system and for teams to get a handle on. So the very first factor has got to do with patient recall in itself. You know, recall is a very demanding system. It's a difficult system to organize, manage, and keep up with on a day-to-day basis. It's got many moving parts, which makes it difficult for staff to be able to commit the time to be able to handle all of the functionalities of recall. For the most part, the other factor that comes into play is that you know, staff are swamped. Office staff are very busy trying to keep up with everything that needs to be done on a day-to-day basis in terms of filling dentist schedules, serving patients, dealing with interruptions, and basically the swirl of day-to-day, all of which makes getting to patient recall and staying on top of patient recall challenging. And on top of that, there's a lack of information, systemization, and tools available to staff that are essentially comprehensive enough to support staff to deal with these other challenges and really get a handle on recall. The other thing that we have found as well that I think is worth mentioning is that there can be a lot of upset and make wrong that goes on in dental practices related to recall and hygiene scheduling problems. Open and broken appointments can cause stress for dental teams, and when they become chronic, they can become a significant source of stress. And it's not long afterwards that finger pointing starts. And the common misconception related to that is that somebody is not either committed or doing their job properly. But if you really take a look at what is going on underneath the surface, what you see is that recall and hygiene scheduling problems do not occur because of a lack of commitment or competence. Recall and scheduling problems occur primarily due to the lack of resource systemization and tools to support office staff to actually get that job done. So these are not easy challenges to deal with, and we've had to continually deal with these challenges in our work with dental practices. And over time, we have identified 3 steps that every dental practice can take to really get a handle on these problems and get the most from their recall systems. So we've built these steps into our software, but whether you're using software or not, these steps are critical to maintaining and maximizing the results of your recall system. And what we found is that if you take care of these steps, recall starts to take care of itself, and they really get to the heart of what works as far as recall system management is concerned. And what I'm going to do with you is I'm going to review the steps, the key measurements that we use in our consulting practice and our software that we monitor. And these steps really represent some of the most important lessons that we've learned that you can take back to your practices and put to work. The first step is regarding pre-appointing patients. So the goal is to pre-appoint 80% of patients before they leave your practice. From our viewpoint, this is the single most important thing you can do as far as recall system management is concerned. The principle behind this is basically it's much easier to move a patient than it is to try to schedule a patient that does not have an appointment. Patients will make more of an effort to keep an appointment that they have than to schedule an appointment that they don't have. Pre-appointing also prevents patients from getting lost in your practice management system if they're not in your schedule. And the other thing is that your patients will start to give your hygiene schedule more consideration and respect when they're not able to acquire an appointment at a drop of a hat. As far as how to accomplish that for your practice, there's a couple of factors that are important to keep into perspective. The first is to take pressure off yourself and your patients. When asking patients to pre-appoint, it's important to keep in mind that you're not asking a patient for a hard commitment. You're really asking a patient for a tentative commitment that allows them to ensure a spot in your hygiene department, one that they can change if they need to. So it's important that you take the pressure off yourself and your patients. And the other thing that we have found is that it's also important that you communicate with confidence. You need to ask and inform patients directly that you'd like to schedule their next appointment, and you need to be prepared to deal with patient resistance to that in a non-reactive manner. And so, sharing with patients that that they're busy, that you don't want them to lose their place in your hygiene system, and that you're happy to move the appointment as necessary can go a very far way in helping achieve 80% pre-appointing scheduling of your patients. And following communication guidelines can be very beneficial related to that. What we found is that, if you're able to successfully implement this step in a practice, you will likely see a 65% increase in the scheduled appointments, and it goes a very far way in helping practices to keep their schedules filled. The next step is related to confirming patients sooner and looking to confirm 80% of scheduled patients before their appointment dates. So given that patients are booked out 3 to 6 months in advance, you want to ensure that at least 80% of these patients are confirmed before their appointment dates in order to minimize openings and cancellations. In order to achieve this goal, most practices have to start confirming appointments sooner than what they're likely doing. We recommend starting at least 2 weeks in advance, in the sense that if you wait a few days in advance to start to confirm appointments, you're likely to experience high levels of cancellations and openings. And the thinking and the principle behind this is pretty straightforward. If you confirm 80% of your appointments before their appointment dates, it gives patients more time to keep and move their appointments. It gives you more time to confirm and fill appointments. And it significantly reduces cancellations and no-shows. Many practices do not want to start sooner because they don't want to have to deal with patients that would want to move or cancel their appointments. But essentially, what happens is if most practices find if they do proceed sooner, patients take appointments that are vacant by other patients. And if you have the right tools, it can actually work in your favor. And again, using the right language really helps. Using a simple word like reserved when you confirm appointments can go a very far way in building value and reducing cancellations. The languaging that many practices use related to having reserved appointments for patients and sharing that either with patients directly on the phone or on answering machines, leaving a message that you have an appointment reserved for the patient and that the doctor or the clinician has also reserved time for the patient, can go a very far way in building the value. And finally, the other, along with that, you would see a 50% reduction in cancellations. We have seen that repeatedly with the practices that have been able to incorporate that step. And finally, the final step in the process has got to do with focusing on due patients before focusing on late and overdue patients. Most practices have significant numbers of patients that are late and overdue in their files, which can be a pretty daunting task for office staff to try and deal with. The trick here is, rather than trying to follow up on all of your patients at once, you really want to focus and concentrate on contacting patients that are due or coming due for their appointments, getting at least 80% of these patients contacted before their due dates. These are patients that are coming in, is the one list of patients you really want to stay on top of. Typically, this list of patients is going to be most responsive, and it actually keeps you, ahead of the curve and puts out the right message. So from there, we recommend a program of follow-up on your late and overdue patients that's, consistent and manageable, basically one step at a time. And if you're able to keep up with these lists, what you'll expect to see is basically a 15% increase in your patient retention is certainly achievable from keeping up with these particular lists. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to provide you with a brief industry update about the tools that are available in the marketplace to assist dental practices with patient recall and how they compare to Recall System Pro. Essentially, the majority of solutions that are available to dental practices with recall are automated messaging-based solutions. And what they do is they rely upon automated messaging as the primary way to confirm appointments and get patients that have fallen out of schedules appointed or reactivated. And certainly these are valuable time savers. You certainly want to make best use of them where you can. We're certainly firm believers in the benefits of automated messaging. We have automated messaging built into our system. Where automated messaging or relying upon automated messaging systems alone for recall become a problem is essentially in two areas. First of all, they're not comprehensive enough, and there's significant numbers of patients that are simply not reached or do not respond to automated messaging systems, which results in large numbers of patients being left behind. We can illustrate that with this chart, with the following chart. Here we're looking at a practice that has approximately 2,000 patients. And what we know is that the average number of patients that practices have emails and texts for and permission to use them is about 60% of patients. So 60% of patients, being able to reach 60% of your patients through automated messaging is great, but it's important to keep in perspective that essentially that 40% of your patients may not be reached by automated messaging. And 40% is not a small number, and it's important simply to keep that into perspective. Where automated messaging starts to become a problem is in terms of confirming scheduled patients. What we know is that approximately 70% of scheduled patients respond to automated messaging. And again, it's of great value that we can reach 40% of patients with automated messaging, but approximately 60% of your total patients are not reached or do not respond to automated messaging as far as confirming their appointments. And 60% of patients can result in high levels of openings and cancellations, and many practices are taking other action to confirm those patients outside of automated messaging, which we certainly recommend. And where automated messaging alone really becomes a problem is related to unscheduled patients. So only 15% of unscheduled patients respond to automated messaging. So that leaves approximately 90% of unscheduled patients that aren't reached or do not respond to automated messaging. And that can become a significant problem if you consider how many patients typically fall out of a schedule, cancel or move their appointments. This can turn into a problem. So what we have done is, given the difference that recall can make, if you're wanting to grow a practice and really take advantage of what recall can offer, it's our viewpoint that practices need to find ways of contacting and appointing patients that have fallen out of a schedule and are not reached or don't respond to automated messaging. And that's really where Recall System Pro comes into play. The reasons that practices struggle with this, as I shared earlier, is for the most part they don't have the right tools to get the job completed. Our experience is that practice management software systems are not easy for busy office staff to work with, particularly related to confirming and trying to contact patients that have fallen out of a schedule. And as we've seen, messaging systems, although important, are simply not comprehensive enough. What we set out to do was to provide dental practices with a solution that was comprehensive enough to tackle the challenges of recall and produce the type of results that we had covered today. So we felt that there could be a lot more done to assist dental practices with recall, which is why we built Recall System Pro. And what Recall System Pro does is basically three things. In addition to allowing dental practices to take advantage of automated messaging, Recall System Pro automates and streamlines all of the continuing care and recall system functionalities that the practice management platforms provide. And then Recall System Pro provides office staff with some very functional and practical tools that enable them to get patients scheduled and save all kinds of time and stress in the process. So what I'd like to do is just to provide you with a quick introduction to Recall System Pro, just to show you some of the functionalities. So I'm just going to exit out of this screen here. There we go. And let me introduce you to Recall System Pro. The software is a cloud-based application that works alongside of major practice software systems as an add-on. It auto-extracts the information it needs from your practice management software and provides users with the fully automated recall system that I'm about to show you. The first thing I'd like to show you is the toolbar, which you can actually see on the right-hand side here. This toolbar works alongside your practice management scheduler. It's very easy for staff to access and use. Staff do not have to leave their schedulers to use the software. And I can just show you here as to how this would work alongside of your scheduler, to give you an example. There we go. So the software works directly alongside of your scheduler. Staff do not have to leave the software. Very easy to integrate into staff's daily workflow, and it's a valuable time saver for staff in being able to work with the software on a day-to-day basis. I'll introduce you to the patient lists of Recall System Pro. And these lists get to the heart of how Recall System Pro manages recall for practices. And what you're seeing here is a list of 2 patients. The first list is a list of patients that have recall and hygiene appointments scheduled. And these lists are designed to support dental practices to confirm the maximum number of appointments possible to reduce openings and cancellations. And the second list here are lists of patients that do not have hygiene or recall appointments scheduled, are either due or late or overdue with their appointments. And Recall System Pro ensures that these patients do not get lost in your practice management system. And then again, it gives staff all kinds of tools to get these patients scheduled and prevent them from leaving your practice. As far as the scheduled patient lists are concerned, each of these lists have an automated email or text message that works in the background. Patients receive emails and texts that provide them with a button that they can respond with to confirm their appointments. when the patient confirms their appointments, that information is sent here, which is directly on the toolbar right next to the practice's scheduler, so that staff are able to quickly access that information and get those patients confirmed in your scheduler. When practices have had an opportunity to use the messaging system, what they find is the frequencies that we have set here have been very helpful in getting appointments confirmed. And practices can set and use this functionality in a number of different ways. There are many practices that utilize the messaging system and have the messaging system working for them in the background, or they can also use these lists to contact patients that aren't reached or do not respond to the automated messaging system, depending on how they're going about confirming appointments now. So Recall System Pro gives them the flexibility to both use the automated messaging system or the lists. Let me show you how these lists work and the tools that we've built into Recall System Pro to help staff confirm appointments and schedule patients and save time. This is a list here I'm going to show you. This is a list of patients that are coming up and due for their appointments within 2 weeks of their appointment dates. And essentially what you'll see here is the date of the appointment and the time that the patient is actually due for the appointment and what operatory the patient is due in. And one of the things that you'll notice related to Recall System Pro is that these symbols here indicate patients that have been sent an automated email and or a text so that they know who they need to contact and which patients that they can wait and see respond to the messaging system. So this is a valuable time saver for staff in the sense that it allows staff to cover way more ground and fill more appointments and reduce time wasting chasing patients just by virtue of the fact that they're able to determine which patients that they would need to contact and which patients are potentially going to respond to the automated email and text messaging. I'll show you a number of the other features that we built into Recall System Pro as how they apply to the unscheduled patient list. And so what I'm going to show you here is the unscheduled patient list. And essentially what you'll see here, these are lists of patients that do not have appointments scheduled. And these are patients that are then organized and prioritized based on whether their appointments are due or whether their appointments are late or overdue. This list also has automated email and text messaging that is being issued in the background. And when patients are able to actually request appointments when they receive the emails and texts, and again, those requests for appointments are sent here directly on the desktop, make it very easy for staff to be able to access that information and be able to contact those patients. What Recall System Pro basically does as far as this list management is concerned is that it organizes and prioritizes all of the patients and ensures that those patients don't get lost in your practice management system, and it keeps them organized for staff so that when staff are actually ready to contact patients, the information is ready for them. They're not having to spend any time organizing or managing any of the information, and it allows them to essentially just cover more ground without having to spend a lot of time organizing lists and putting lists together. What I'm going to do now is just show you some of the functionality and the time-saving tools that come along with Recall System Pro in terms of following up on these patients. This is the due and unscheduled patient list, and again, all of the lists work similar as you've seen here in terms of the confirmation list. In this list here, we also have the dates that patients are actually coming due, and patients are organized by when they're coming due. These patients also have, as you noticed here, that the patients that have emails or message that have been sent to them have been identified here, so staff can quickly determine which patients to contact and which patients they can wait to receive information from. And Recall System Pro, in terms of time-saving tools, I'm just going to show you a few of those here. The first thing that I would show you is that the patient information file that we have with Recall System Pro. So what you're seeing here is all the information that a staff member would need to be able to contact a patient and be able to get a patient scheduled and have all of the information available to them that would make that very easy for them and very efficient for them to do. Staff are not having to go through 2 or 3 screens to access this information. It's readily available to them here, and they can quickly contact patients and have all the information available that they need, including having an understanding of the patient's family appointment files, so that when they're contacting a patient, they can also be communicating with the patient related to other family members. The other functionality that we've built into Recall System Pro to help staff communicate with patients is we've got automated call coaching built in directly to the system. So what this enables staff to do is if they're making a call, it provides them with access to the coaching scripts and communication guidelines that help them to be more effective in making calls, but it also helps them to feel more confident in making calls and communicating with patients. And this is also a feature from a training perspective that management staff have found very valuable in helping staff to acquire the skills to properly contact patients. Another feature that we have built into Recall System Pro, which is a very helpful time-saving feature, has got to do with automated short notice list functionality. When staff are actually making calls to patients, if a patient prefers to be put on a short notice list because they like to get in earlier, the staff member is able to quickly assign a patient to a short notice list based on the type of short notice appointment that the patient is interested in. One of the interesting features of Recall System Pro is that a patient could be set at a specific date and time, and then when an appointment becomes available, a staff member would be able to go to their short notice list, and I'll just show you that here. That's built into Recall System Pro. Select this list will show you all of the patients that are assigned to the short notice list, and then a staff member can quickly, if they have an appointment available on a Tuesday at 2 o'clock, they can quickly identify all the patients that are available at a Tuesday at 2 o'clock, and with the click of 2 buttons, they can send those patients a email that's pre-prepared, advising the patient that there's an appointment available at 2 p.m. on a specific date. They can add an additional note. They can send that particular message. And within a very short period of time, patients respond to the email. They're informed that an appointment is available. If they'd like the appointment, they should be calling in quickly. And the patients then tend to fill those appointments quickly and saving staff all kinds of time. Some of the other functionalities, just to quickly complete with the tour of the product, we have also a Today's Patients feature, and this is built into Recall System Pro to help staff do a couple of things that we had spoken with you about earlier, and that is really to collect email and cell information from patients so that the automated messaging system can work a little bit more effectively for you, and also to remind staff to pre-appoint patients for their next hygiene and recall appointments. So as I stated earlier, that's certainly an important aspect of maintaining an effective recall system is to get patients pre-appointed, and Recall System Pro provides staff with reminders on a day-to-day basis to help staff pre-appoint patients and maximize the benefit of your recall system for you. So those are essentially the key features that we have made available into Recall System Pro. The one important aspect of Recall System Pro is that the software can be shared with staff members. It can have more than one staff member working with the software. So if you have, for example, it can be loaded on several. As many systems as you'd like in the office. So what Recall System Pro allows you to do is to actually have more than one staff member working on recall. And in large group practices or busy solo practices, that can be very helpful. Staff members can share the responsibility to recall, and also because Recall System Pro works in real time, it allows staff members to immediately know if another staff member is in communication with a patient, and so it keeps everybody in sync related to the handling of your recall in your office. And then the final feature related to Recall System Pro has got to do with the reports that are available in Recall System Pro from a management perspective, and I'll just show you these reports. We've got them here. And essentially, what you're seeing here is the reporting suite that's available in Recall System Pro, and essentially what it does is it allows practices to monitor a number of these key indicators so that they're able to determine how well the recall system is working, and if there's any problems with some of these key indicators that we've identified that we had spoken to you about, the number, for example, the number of pre-appointed patients, the number of confirmed patients, etc. Recall System Pro enables dental practices to identify those in advance and really allow you to put in the correction before slippage occurs with your practice. So that's pretty well an overview of Recall System Pro. I'm just going to wrap up the presentation here, and then certainly happy to answer questions. One of the things that we would like to just share with everyone, we just want to thank you for your time this evening in terms of the going through the presentation. We're certainly open to providing you with any information that you might need related to Recall System Pro.